Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Well, today I work for you all. October, November 2025, 9708, Region 14. We'll be solving MCQs today. So let's see what this paper has brought for us today. Moving forward, MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 says, what is characterized as a free good? Now, we all know a free good is one that requires no factors of reduction, hence, it has got no opportunity cost. It is the one that's not scarce and their consumption is not limited by scarcity. For instance, what can be a free good? Air, rainfall, sunlight, right? So, now looking at the definition, keeping this thing in mind, let's look at the options. One that is zero opportunity cost, one that is non-excludable and non-rivalrous. That's a public good. One that is supplied by the government with no charge. B says one that receives 100% government subsidy. So it's not C, B is a public good, it's not D, it has to be A. It has got zero opportunity cost. One that doesn't require any factor of reduction, right? So for MCQ number 1, we'll shade in A as our correct response. Moving forward, MCQ number 2. MCQ number 2 says which combination correctly identifies the rewards to each factor of reduction. Now notice under each of the factor of reduction, land, labor, enterprise and capital, what are the rewards? That means the factor payments. Rewards mean factor payments. We all know for land it has to be rent, for labor it has to be wages, for enterprise it has to be profit, and for capital, interest. So looking at that, it has to be option B. So we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 3. MCQ number 3 says a government wants to move its economy away from central planning, that means away from command economy, to a market economy. Which policy would be consistent with the same? That means something that has to be there all the time. A says introduce tariffs on imported goods. No, not necessarily. You see, a market economy is one in which government is no rule, right? So it intervenes only when required. So providing free education for primary school pupils, reducing the prices of goods, just privatizing the ownership of electricity generation is the correct answer, right? Because once it's moving to a market economy, this means what? We want the private sector to dominate. We want a minimum role for government. So something that has to be there all the time is a dominance of the private sector. So for MCQ number 3, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 4. Now, MCQ number 4 displays multiple PPC curves. It says a country is currently producing at output Z on the curve XY. Now, the vertical axis displays capital goods, the horizontal axis displays consumer goods. Its annual economic growth rate is forecast to decline over the next 10 years to 5% per year. Now, they have estimated that for the coming 10 years, economic growth would be consistent each year. It would hover around 5%. Now, they're saying if the forecast is correct, which point would represent exactly its economic output in 10 years? So now see, it is growing at a 5% rate. It's not that the economy won't grow. So growth means what? An increase in the productive capacity, an increase in the output of both capital and consumer goods. Hence, the economy would move to point D. Because even though the growth rate might be falling, it's still it's positive. And that means what? That means the economy is going to produce more output of each type of goods. There would be an increase in output. Hence, for 4, we'll shade in D. Moving forward, MCQ number 5. MCQ number 5 says which statement about factors of reduction is correct. Now we know that when we are talking about the short run and the long run, the short run is the one in which only land is fixed and the rest are all variable, right? In the long run, all the factors of reduction are variable, but in the short run, only land is fixed. So keeping that in mind, MCQ for MCQ number 5, B is the correct answer because it says in the short run at least one factor is fixed, that means line, and in the long run all factors can be varied. So for MCQ number 5, we'll shade in B as our correct answer. I hope you have understood. Moving forward, MCQ number 6. Which factor affects the price elasticity of supply of a product? Now, price elasticity of supply means what? Percentage change in quantity supply divided by percentage change in price. That means what? That means for a small change in price, there is a change in the quantity supplied of that product, right? So, we all know that for price elasticity of supply, if the producer has unused capacity or he has unemployed raw materials or he has stocks of unsold goods or stocks of finished goods. So that means what? He can easily respond to changes in price. If the price rises and he has got stocks of unfinished goods or raw materials, he can either use those raw materials to produce more output or he can take that stock out and use it to meet the surge in demand, right? So if it has got availability of stocks, it can correspond. Why it can't be B and C? Because B talks about percentages of income spent in the product, prices of food. This all relates to price elasticity of demand. D talks about the wage rate. It can't be the wage rate because once we are talking about the wage rate, we are determining, we are talking about the output and we are not determining the elasticity. So it cannot be C, it cannot be B, it cannot be D. It has to be A. Because when you're talking about price elasticity supply, we're talking about either unused capacity or we are talking about unsold goods. So that is easily responds to the changes in prices that can be met by the producer. So for 6, we'll shade in A. Moving forward, MCQ number 7. MCQ number 7 says a firm sells 10,000 units of a product which has an estimated income elasticity of demand of a negative zero point 0.4. So now this means what? This means that the good is inferior. It has got a negative sign attached to it. That means it is inferior good. Inferior good is 1, which means what? That as income rises, its quantity demanded falls, or as income falls, its quantity demanded rises. So this means it would classify as an inferior good. Now what happens? They are talking about if incomes have fallen by 10%. So let's first put in the formula. Income elasticity of demand is equals to percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in income. So in the numerator, we'll put in x because that we don't know. In the denominator, we'll put in a negative zero point 0.1. And over here, we'll put in a negative zero point 0.4 because that's they've given us. The value of income elasticity demand, once you cross multiply, you will get in 400. And when you will add on to it, it should be 10,400. So what does this shows? This shows that as income fell, this was the new quantity demanded. So this was what? An inferior good, right? So what will we do? We shade in B as the correct answer. Number 8. Number 8 says what is most likely cause of the equilibrium point moving from X to Y. So now initially we were at a demand curve D1 and we were at a supply curve S1 and X was the point. Now what happened? The demand increased from D1 to D2 but the supply fell. Demand rose from D1 to D2 but supply fell from S1 to S2. As a result, now we are at y. Now they are saying what? What is most likely cause of the equilibrium point moving from x to y? Why do you think this has happened? This means that of now they're talking about real incomes and they're talking about appreciation or depreciation of the exchange rate. Now, if the demand rose, this means what? There must have been an increase in real income. That is why the demand rose. So we'll chop A and B because they both talk about the fall. Now, what about the supply? The supply fell. So now if the supply fell, this means what? This means imports were expensive. This means that the exchange rate must have depreciated, right? That is why the supply fell. So, looking at that, we'll put in C as the correct answer. Since imports became expensive, the currency must have depreciated, causing the supply to fall. And as income rose, the demand rose, qualifying it as a normal good. That is why for 8, we'll shade in C as our correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 9. What is a major function of the price mechanism? We all know price mechanism helps signals to producers and consumers what is in demand, right? It acts as a signal, right? What to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, right? It helps determine the equilibrium. So for that, we know it signals the changes in the market conditions, both to the consumers and the producers. It helps determining the equilibrium price. So for 9, we'll shade in D as our correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 10. The MCQ number 10 displays the demand and the supply curves. It says that D and S were the initial demand in the supply curves for a good. The vertical axis displays price, horizontal displays the quantity. Now they say which row represents the change in consumer and producer surplus if supply rises to S1. So now if the supply curve shifts from S to S1, there are certain changes that have occurred in the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. Now they're asking us what has happened. So now let's first see what was the initial consumer and producer surplus, then we'll see what has happened to it. Now, supply has fallen, price rose, consumer surplus fell, and producer surplus rose. So now initial was what? W and X. That was the initial producer surplus. That means below the equilibrium. Below the equilibrium. Now after the price increase, the consumer surplus, producer surplus is what? S and V. Again below equilibrium. What about consumer surplus? Initial consumer surplus was RSTU. RSTU. The maximum the consumers were willing to pay and the price they paid. Right? Now, what's the consumer surplus? R. So now it's R. Initially, it was RSTU. And now the producer surplus is S plus V. So looking at both parts of the table, the correct answer is D. So for 10, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. I hope you've understood. Moving forward, what is a characteristic of a public good? We all know a public good is one which is non-excludable and non-rivalry is there. So now let's look at the options. Households are rivals? No, it cannot be. The amount of the good available diminishes as households consume it. Again, it's incorrect. Households cannot accurately value the benefits of a good. This is a merit good. So it's not A, it's not C, it's not D, it has to be B. Households cannot be excluded from consuming the good, which is non-excludability. So for 11, we'll shade in B. Moving forward, MCQ number 12. MCQ number 12 says a government imposes a specific indirect tax on a product that has an inelastic demand curve. What is the incidence of tax in this case? Now, incidence of tax means what? Incidence of tax means the extent to which the tax is borne by the producer and the consumer, right? So, the more the inelastic demand is, the easier it is for the seller to pass it on in the form of higher prices, right? So, this means what? This means that the tax would fall more on the consumer than the producer, because the higher the inelasticity, the easier it is for the producer to pass it on to the consumer. So for 12, we'll shade in C. Moving forward, MCQ number 13. What is an example of a direct public provision of goods and services? That means something which is directly being provided by the government or the public sector. Now, A says a charity hospital funded by public donations. Now, if it is publicly donated hospital, but then again, it's no role of the government, right? Because the general public or the people of the country are providing it, the citizens are providing it, so it's not correct. D says a private school, again, we have want public, we want government. A private sector pharmacy, again, it's incorrect. A mobile government library that travels to rural villages, access to books. Yes, that's exactly being directly being something effort provided by the government directly. So for 13, we shaded B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 14. MCQ number 14 says, when is a minimum wage likely to help reduce the problem of income inequality? We all know a minimum wage is the one which is set above the equilibrium price, right? So when we are providing minimum wages, that means we are talking about the wage level above the equilibrium, right? So it has to be above in order to be effective. Now, when would it alleviate the problem of income inequality? See, if labor mobility is low, it would be of no use if the labor is not occupationally or geographically mobile. If immobility is there, so there's no point in establishing it, right? Higher paid workers maintain pay differentials. Again, if there exists a lot of disparity between higher income groups and lower income groups, again, it would be of no use. If the minimum wage leads to increased unemployment, then what's the point in establishing a wage rate if more people are again laid off? So when would it be effective? In which the informal economy is small. Informal economy means that you have an idea regarding how many people are unemployed. You have the exact report. There's no underreporting, right? So this would be helpful. So for 14, we'll shade in C. Moving forward, MCQ number 15. What is not true about subsidies? So this means there's one thing which is false and all three things would be true. So we need something that is not true about subsidies. They are paid to firms. Yes, that's true. They have to be paid back. No. So this is not true. They reduce the cost of production. Yes, that's true. They shift the supply curve to the right. That's true. So we want something that's not true. So we'll choose B. Get it? So for 15, we'll shade in B. You see, at times the questions are very simple, but then they are phrased in such a way that you get tricked. For a moment, you would then choose the incorrect answer. So it's always wise to reread the question. All right, now moving forward, MCQ number 16. Now, MCQ number 16, they've given us a flow chart. Now, what have they done is they have displayed the flow between three groups of people with four possible flows between them. They've displayed this diagram. Now, they're saying which flow indicates that people have become discouraged from seeking work. That means people must have been not willing to work. Now, which flow is showing that? They are asking you. So, now notice people were unemployed. A shows people were unemployed and not in the labor force. They do not have work, but they do not want to be working. This shows discouraging. That's the correct answer. But then why it can't be the others? Now let's look at B. B says not in labor force and unemployed. So if somebody is not in labor force and is unemployed, this means not in the labor force means either it could be underaged or elderly, retired. right? Somebody who's not willing and not able to work. So it cannot be B. C says employed and now became unemployed. It could be for any reasons. It could be maybe frictional employment. It could be maybe structural employment. But it does not show that the person is not willing to work or not is discouraged to work. So it cannot be C. D says employed but not in the labor force. So this means again it's part of the black economy, right? This means that the person is employed but it's not being recorded or it's not in the statistics of the employed people. So it cannot be D. So it has to be A. So for 16, we'll shade in A as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 17. What is required to prevent a rising price level due to an increase in aggregate demand? So now you want to stop inflation that is happening because of an increase in aggregate demand. That means what? Demand pull inflation. So too much money chasing too few goods. So now in order to stop inflation caused by increase in aggregate demand, what should be done? That's the question. So option C says greater reliance must be placed on imported goods. D says wage rates must change more frequently. So now both C and D would worsen the scenario. Because if you frequently increase the wages or if you depend on imported goods, again, it would worsen the scenario and it would increase inflation. So you'll chop C and D. B says government investment must remain at a constant supply. Government investment cannot remain at a constant supply because government macroeconomic aims cannot be at constant level. There are constant shifts into it. So we'll chop B. Additional productive capacity must be created. So when there is a cushion, when you've got additional productive capacity, so you can meet the surge in demand and you can absorb the increase in demand without bringing in changes in price level. We can easily increase the supply. So the shortage or the surge will not cause demand pull inflation. So for 17, we'll shade in A as our correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 18. Now for MCQ number 18, they're saying it's an open economy. An open economy is one that takes part in international trade. So now they are saying that an open economy has government in equilibrium at a national income of 900 million, households spend 700 million, firms spend 100 million, government spends 150 million and has got a balanced budget. Now balanced budget means what? That both sides of the equation are equal, right? So we've put in these statistics and we'll try to find out how much is spent on exports and imports. So what will we do is we'll say national income is equals to C plus I plus G plus exports minus imports. So we'll write in 700 plus 100 plus a 150 plus an X minus N, right? So now what happens? This has to be 950. This has to be 900 plus X minus N. So now take that over that side. It should be negative 50 is equals to X minus N. This means what? This means that the imports are 50 million more. Imports are greater than exports, right? So imports are greater than exports. So it has to be C. So for 18, we'll choose in C as the correct answer, right? It's a negative sign showing, so this means that the imports are more than the exports. Moving forward, MCQ number 19. Which increase makes cost push inflation less likely to happen? This means out of these four options, this increase would not cause a cost push inflation. Indirect tax rates would cause an increase in producers' cost and would increase the prices of goods. Raw material shortages would again cause the price of the goods to go up and would cause cost push inflation because the producer would then increase the price of the goods. Trade union power would again increase the price of the goods. Why? Because they would press the firms for higher wages, and the wages would increase, so the price of the goods would increase. So A, B, and D are all incorrect because they all will cause a cost plus inflation. It's the foreign exchange rate rise which would not cause cost plus inflation, because it would, when the exchange rate would appreciate, what would happen? The exchange rate would appreciate, the exports would become expensive, and the imports would get less costly, so the cost would fall. So for 19, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Number 20. When calculating national income by the income method, what would not be included? So when we are talking about the calculation of national income, three things must be included except for one. That's the question which they are asking. So when we are calculating the national income using the income method, wages, rent, interest, profit. So wages, rent, interest, and profits are all included. It's transfer payments that is not included. So A, B, and C are all included. It's B which is not included. So we'll shade in D as the correct answer because they're asking not included. 21. What is an example of expansionary fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is what? In which we are talking about government expenditure and fiscal policy is government expenditure and taxes, right? So when we are talking about expansionary fiscal policy, we are talking about increasing government expenditure and a fall in taxes. So now keep that in mind. An increase in income tax, no, that would be a contractionary fiscal policy. An increase in private sector investment, that doesn't talks about fiscal policy. An increase in spending on public goods, yes, that's the correct answer. An increase in the money supply, we are talking about monetary policy expansion. So it's not A, it's not B, it's not D, it has to be C. So for 21, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 22. An economy has both increasing imported raw material price and demand pull inflation. So now the imported price of the raw material is increasing, and as a result, demand pull inflation is also increasing. That means too much money to reaching too few goods. Which combination of policies will help government achieve its macroeconomic aim of price stability? That means it help control inflation. Now, what does it wants to do? It wants to curb demand pull inflation, and it wants to stop the raw material price to increase. So now budget deficit means what? This means spending was greater than the revenue, right? So the budget deficit has to what? Decrease. So the budget deficit has to decrease so that too much money chasing too few goods falls, so that aggregate demand shrinks. So it either has to be A or B. So you can choose C and D. What about the exchange rate? Now, since the price of raw materials are increasing, this means the exchange rate is what? Exchange rate must appreciate or depreciate? Exchange rate must appreciate, right? Because you want the aggregate demand to fall, right? So if exchange rate appreciates, import should get cheap. So looking at that, B is turning to be the answer. And what about the rate of interest? The rate of interest should also increase so that people stop spending and start investing. So they'll stop spending and start investing because it becomes lucrative to save your money. So for 22, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Number 23. What is an example of a supply side policy? A supply side policy is one in which increases the productive potential of the economy, increases the productive capacity. Import quotas would restrict the supply of goods. It cannot be A because it restricts. It cannot be B because it talks about interest rate, it talks about monetary policy. It cannot be C because it talks about fiscal policy. It's a subsidy to businesses to promote the supply of training that would increase the productivity and increase the productive potential. So for 23, we'll shade in D. Moving forward, number 24. A workers earn 10,000, pays 1,000 in income tax. Another earn 30, pays 4,500, another earns 1,50,000 and pays 50,000 income tax. Now notice what is happening. As the level of income increases, so does the level of income tax. Now what does this show? What type of tax? Progressive. That means that as the level of income increases, the proportion of tax increases. So for 24, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 25. An increase in interest rate is an example of which type of policy? So we all know when we are talking about interest rate, we are talking about monetary policy, right? So when interest rate increase, that means what? We are talking about contractionary monetary policy. So for 25, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, number 26. For which government measure would both outcomes shown be likely to benefit the economy? So now look at outcome 1 and outcome 2, and both should be helping the economy. Protecting against import of harmful materials, encouraging illegal trade and corruption, embargoes. If it encourages illegal trade, that's incorrect. We want both to satisfy. They are a drain on government expenditure, they give home producers a cost advantage. What export subsidies? If they are a drain, they are not benefiting, will chop B. C says import quotas are restricting volume of expensive imports and they're also helping reduce the BOP deficit. That's correct. So we'll change in C for 26. Moving forward, MCQ number 27. MCQ number 27 gives us the terms of trade. Now, what are terms of trade? It's just a ratio of export prices and import prices. Now, notice what is happening. The terms of trade rose from 101 to 104, then to 109. So, what can be said? That means since it's rising, this means terms of trade must have improved. So the ratio or the price of exports rose relative to the price of imports. So 27 will shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 28. Which explanation for a country choosing to engage in international trade is not valid? That means there must be three reasons that are correct that has enabled the country to be involved in international trade except for one. That means, why do you think this may not be the reason for the country to be involved in international trade? Engaging in international trade enables the country to achieve a higher average standard of living. That's correct. The country would want to do that, but they're saying this would not valid. This is valid. The country wants to increase its standard of living. B says other countries are more efficient at producing some goods. Again, this is a valid. It wants not to produce all goods. It wants to maybe acquire low cost products from other countries that may be in high quality. So it cannot be B as well. C say there are some products that the country cannot produce. Again, that's a valid reason for you to get engaged in international trade because there's something that you do not produce effectively. The other countries might be, and you want to see advantage by getting engaged in international trade. B says the country has a comparative advantage in the production of all goods. So if you got an advantage in the production of all goods, what's the purpose in getting engaged in international trade then? Right? So we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Number 29. In which economic context is the term protectionism usually applied? That means we use the term protectionism in what context? In what aspect? Usually we use protectionism in order to protect the local infant industries from foreign manufacturers, right? So we want to protect the local producers against international competitors. In that aspect, we use protectionism. So for 29, we'll shade in C. Last MCQ for today, MCQ number 30. It talks about both the US and the European Union operate in floating exchange rate markets. So they are left the determination of the exchange rate onto their free market forces. Now they're saying the rate of exchange rate fluctuated greatly between this period from 2000, then 2008, then 2022. What happened if I list it down? The euro and the dollar. Now notice what had happened. 1 euro was initially equal to 0.84, then it was 1.59, then it became equal. So now notice what happened. Now let's look at the option. Changes in supply and demand for dollars and euros in the foreign exchange rate. Yes, that's the correct answer, but why it can't be B, C, and D? It says B says continuous appreciation of the dollar. Now notice what had happened to dollar. Initially, dollar was 0.84, then it depreciated, then it. So there were constant fluctuation, right? It appreciated, it depreciated both. continuous depreciation of the US dollar. So the US dollar fluctuated. Initially, it was offering 0.84, then 1.59. So the dollar depreciated. And then again, it became one. So it wasn't continuous depreciation, it wasn't continuous appreciation. Restraints placed by trade agreements on the rate of exchange rate. No, that's not correct because there is no evidence as such given in this table. So it's not B, it's not C, it's not D. It's the changes in the supply and demand for dollars and euros in the forex exchange market that has caused so much of fluctuation. So for 30, you shade in A as the correct answer. I hope you understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning. I'll be back with more such papers for you.